Welcome everyone to Books to Be Book Club. We are interviewing Professor Wayne Visser, author of Thriving, the breakthrough movement to regenerate nature, society, and economy. First, some housekeeping. We are going to have a 1-hour event with some questions. Me and Melissa are going to moderate the questions to Professor Wayne Visser. In a minute, I will introduce Professor Wayne and Melissa. And we welcome your questions, and you can write your questions in the chat, please. And we are going to answer the questions during the event, alternating your questions with ours. And we hope to have a very nice discussion on the contents of this amazing book. So thanks, Dr. Wayne Visser, for accepting our invitation to the book club. We are delighted to have you here. It's a great honor to exchange some ideas on your new book. It is, by the way, in the #1 best-selling book list for new release on Amazon. Congratulations.
Thank you. Great pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. So some words about the biography of Dr. Wayne Visser. Is a globally recognized Cambridge academic, so he is a practitioner and an academic at the same time. An idea monger, storyteller, meme weaver. He's the author of 41 books, with this latest one. His work as a champion for thriving, strategy analyst, sustainability academic, documentary filmmaker, poet, and professional speaker has taken him to more than 75 countries. He has been recognized by trusts across America as one of the world's top 100 thought leaders in trustworthy business and named a top 100 sustainability leader by ABC Carbon. Dr. Visser currently serves as head tutor, fellow, and lecturer at the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, and as professor of integrated value at Antwerp Management School, where he holds the world's first academic chair in sustainable transformation. He is also director of the think tank and media company Kaleidoscope Futures Lab and founder of CSR International. His film Closing the Loop was the film that most impacted me and made me look for studying with him at CISL, where I also met Melissa, who is sharing the moderation of the event today. I was so glad when I found the Cambridge Sustainability Leadership Program, where you are one of the head tutors. It was the best course that I did in the area 2 years ago. And I also wish to welcome Melissa. If you want to say hi, Melissa.
Hi. Yes, thank you very much for working with me this time. Yeah, I'm honored to be here and be with everyone and Professor Visser.
So some words about Melissa. She is a multi-specialist. She has a degree in aerospace engineering and has worked in the automotive industry where she also did voluntary work in gender diversity. Her untamable curiosity led her to study marketing communications, sustainability, and leadership. At the moment, she is writing her MBA thesis on leadership for sustainability, besides her job at the German Aerospace Center. So I hand the floor to Melissa.
Yeah. As Professor Visser has dedicated almost 10 years of research to thriving, we can consider it as his masterpiece so far. Among his previous works, also essential reading for sustainability leaders, this one has taken the task to present a vast array of solutions to our global challenges. Professor Vane is also a great poet, and we have the pleasure to read some of his finest ones in this book. I will just read one paragraph of his poem, which is in the beginning of this book, just to give you a sense. The markets live and breathe in complex webs we weave. The synapses of trade have made the things we need. Each deed, a chance to lead. While tech is getting smart, yet still, it needs a heart, a compass as a guide, to tide us through the storm and find a better norm, a breakthrough to renew, an innovation drive. Yes, markets too can thrive.
Thank you. The poems of Professor Wayne is a great part of the book. So, the first question, Professor Wayne. Prior to the launch of the book, I have seen some posts from you talking about how your book goes along with other books launched in the field recently. For example, Regeneration from Prof, or How to Avoid a Climate Disaster from Bill Gates. Sustainability can only be achieved through partnerships because the goals are too ambitious and the transition is so challenging. Was this basic idea of partnering the idea behind when you made the recommendation for the audience to read those books on this subject in addition to yours?
Thanks for the question, Daniela, and also for the invitation to be with you today. And firstly, let me also say thank you for hosting in my language. I wish that I could do this in Portuguese. I'm sure it would be easier for you and those participating. So thank you for that indulgence. To your question, I'm convinced that we only get to a thriving future if we build a movement. This can't be something for a few rich, privileged people, perhaps a few educated people to get excited about. This has to be a broad-based social movement. And you don't get to a movement without collaborating, without joining hands with others who are championing this cause. And it happens that, I have great respect for some of the other thought leaders in the field, people like Paul Hawken, who wrote Regeneration and many other books before that, John Elkington with Green Swans. It fits very nicely with the new book from Paul Pullman and Andrew Winston, Net Positive, and a number of others. I've just finished reading the book by Jane Goodall called The Book of Hope. So there are many others that are complementary, and I pay tribute to those in the book, but mostly I want to say that we need to all work together, otherwise we don't get the necessary momentum that we need to make this change happen.
Thanks. That's very important, indeed. Melissa?
Okay, then I'll ask the next question. You have, in your book, you have defined thriving as the new sustainability. Could you illustrate us the difference between the two?
Yes, and I say this as somebody who has worked for more than 30 years in sustainability, right? I got involved ahead of the first Rio Earth Summit, which took place in your country in 1992. I was a young student studying business, and we had a global business association called ISEC that started to get people together to bring a student or a young people's voice to that global conference, which still today, by the way, is the greatest gathering of heads of state that has ever been achieved. And so we went to Tokyo in Japan, and we looked at the problems of the world, and we came up with what we thought were great solutions. And we thought it would be really quite easy, because the problems were clear and so were the solutions, and all we needed was the politicians to take action. And here we are more than 30 years later, still, you know, working on sustainability. We now have the Sustainable Development Goals, all 17 of them, and yet many of the trends are headed in the wrong direction still, some very rapidly. We see what I call in the book breakdowns in our global society, in nature, and in the economy. So that has to say that something is not working. And I think the something is that we have framed it incorrectly. You know, firstly, we've forgotten that sustainability was actually sustainable development. So actually it was a development agenda, not what has become sustainability for many people, which is more an economic and an environmental agenda. So, you know, there are three things I can say after more than 30 years in sustainability. One is that it's still not clear what it is. You ask everyone in this room what sustainability is, you'll get many different answers. And if we can't achieve a unity of understanding after so many decades, then I think we have a problem. The second thing is that it's not been very effective. Because it's been pursued in so many different ways. Some companies think it's really just about doing a little less harm, having some goals, but not really changing their business. Governments likewise think it's about a few small changes here and there. But fundamentally, we haven't changed our underlying economic system, our political system, or certainly our business models. And so not surprising that things still in many areas get worse. So it's not clear, it hasn't worked. And perhaps most importantly, it's not inspiring. Sustainability is boring, actually. Why do I say that? Well, think about what it really means. To sustain something means to continue, to survive. Now, who wakes up in the morning and says, I want to survive today? Well, sure, if your survival is threatened, some people do. But for most of us, if you turn to your partner, perhaps if you're in a relationship, do you say, I hope today that our relationship will be sustainable? No, you want it to thrive. You want it to be flourishing. You want it to be more than just continuing. And so I think that we've aimed too low. And as a result, you know, there's that saying, if you shoot for the stars, you might hit the moon. At the moment, we're shooting for the moon and we're barely getting off of the earth, you know. So if we're aiming for something that is not even about, you know, having a flourishing future or having a prosperous or a thriving future, then no surprise that we're still headed in the wrong direction. So it's a question of reframing, being more ambitious, and then fundamentally understanding that thriving is what life does, you know, and perhaps we'll come to that when we talk about what do we mean by thriving. But it's actually when we get in the way of life's natural processes that things don't thrive and we see breakdown.
So true. Thank you. Do we have any questions yet? Otherwise, I will continue with one more.
Not yet, Lisa, you can go on.
Okay. So, Professor Visser, you define yourself as a systems thinker. What exactly is systems thinking, and what has a forest have to do with that?
Yes, thanks for the question. I mean, in a way, it's why I wrote this book, because for all these decades that I've been working in sustainability, I've understood that we need systems thinking. What is systems thinking? Well, it's about understanding the interconnectedness of everything. Now, the problem is I've understood that for a long time, but how do you make that practical? You know, everyone can say, yes, we're all connected, and then forget about it. So this book has been my struggle to try to translate that into what it would mean for organizations, for societies, and for individuals. And so in the book, I distill 6 underlying scientific keys to thriving, which are really all about systems thinking. And systems thinking is about recognizing patterns and processes as a result of our interconnectedness. Now, the forest is a great example of that, because forests are completely interconnected. A tree is making up a forest. Many trees make a forest, but a forest isn't just a collection of trees. It's actually all the relationships that happen not only between the trees, but between the trees and the sunlight and the weather and the soil and all the fungal, the mushroom connections under the earth. All of these things make up the complex web of a forest, and that's what keeps it alive and thriving. And so it's a good metaphor for what we should be striving for in our societies, our communities, and in our organizations, is something that is really healthy. It happens since we're in a book club, I'll mention this. I'm reading such a fantastic book right now. It's called The Mother Tree. And this is about the scientist who really discovered this, what's now called the wood wide web. So the interconnectedness between trees in the forest using these fungal networks, so the sort of mushroom networks underground. And, you know, this has not been well understood. We've always thought that trees compete with each other for sunlight and for water and so on. And it turns out, in fact, that they support one another, even between different species. They support their young as well. So, you know, a mother tree literally feeds and looks after her younger trees. So this is just a metaphor for what we need to be looking to achieve in our society and nature and in the economy.
Thank you.
Everything is connected. So,
Exactly.
if I can make another question. In the book, you often take us to the historic origin of terms, which makes it so insightful and compelling. For example, the term wicked problems, which is often used to describe our global challenges like poverty, climate change, or species loss. In the book, you offer a different word to use instead. Could you explain us why? Is this a different perspective that could change the way corporations and governments could look at the problems?
Yes, I think so. You may have heard of this term, wicked problems. It actually goes back to some work that was done in the planning profession. Somebody came up with this idea that in complex systems, including in when you're designing, you know, cities or buildings or anything like that, then often the problems are so interconnected and so difficult to solve that there isn't really a simple solution. And that's the basic idea of a wicked problem. It's so related to many different things that it's not easy to solve with a single solution. Now, I don't like the term, you know, when you think of wicked, you think of bad or evil, or, you know, and you actually look for a scapegoat or a villain, and you know, you would normally pick the obvious ones, maybe big companies or corrupt governments or whatever. So I prefer to think of them as entangled problems, because that's what they are. And if you think about a ball of string that gets entangled, and you think about trying to unentangle that, you know, if everybody's just pulling like mad in their own direction on this one ball of string, the knots just get even tighter. And that's often what's happening with our problems today. Everybody has their own view and their own ideology and perhaps their own idea about a solution, and everybody just pulls and pulls without actually listening to anybody else. So dealing with these kinds of problems, of which we have many, right? Climate change is a typical example, maybe inequalities in society. These all have complex causes. They're extremely interlinked to other problems in society. The only way is to really be patient, to work slowly and carefully, very locally, because think about picking apart that string. You have to go into the detail and see where it's knotted, where it's entangled. And most importantly, working with others so that they're not pulling in the opposite direction, but are rather helping you. It's an important insight, though, because we do like, especially from our politicians and sometimes from our business leaders, to hear simple solutions. And that's what gets the votes, right? If they can say they can solve this easily. But that's not the case in life, and certainly not with the problems we face. So what we need are a million different solutions, you know, people working together, moving in the same direction. And, you know, to come back to those principles of thriving, one of them is coherence, which is about achieving that unity. People don't actually have to be coordinated. If they're moving in the same direction, then the system changes. Complexity is another one of the principles, which is all about those interconnections. So that's the basic idea.
I like this analogy of the knots that have to be very interesting. So we have one question from Sonia. Sonia works with us in our company Bridge3. She's asking, is it possible to have a point of intervention in our human system so that it becomes sustainable? If yes, what would it be? Or what would they be?
So maybe I just need to clarify what's meant by in our human system. I don't know, Sonia, if you want to elaborate.
Do you want to speak, Sonia? What do you mean about human system? A country.
In a country, for example, yeah. So in our sort of social systems, it's a very good question. And there are many answers, but I think, again, we need to really think about what is it that causes a system to either break down or to break through and to thrive. And, you know, what we see is that, you know, intervening in a system is about having first a very clear purpose for that system. That's part of the coherence principle. And then having some creativity in that system. So that means really incentivizing or encouraging people to innovate. You do also need what's called convergence. And this is really about creating changes that reinforce one another. So if you look at a country, you might have policy incentives that actually reward either companies or individuals who act more sustainably. And that may be reinforced by breakthrough technologies that make it easier for people to be more sustainable. And that may be reinforced by social movements, maybe the climate strike movement or Extinction Rebellion or Black Lives Matter, that actually make the pressure for that change more urgent and legitimate. And this might be reinforced again by some companies who prove that, you can be very profitable by making these changes. So, this is in a way the role that we all have to see where we're part of the system and figure out what are the interventions we can make that will help these different principles of thriving to work and to support one another. And so that's really how we need to be thinking about it. There is no single thing, but we can take actions that will make it more likely for thriving to occur.
So Sonia, if you can write down, if it's okay, the answer, then we can move on. She told thank you. So.
And I think we'll get to your question, you're saying could be a business as well. I think one of the questions you're going to ask me maybe will answers that one as well.
So I think the next question also, it's in this direction also, because I'm going to question about the 6 shifts which trigger transformation from the forces of breakdown to the forces of breakthrough. That's in the heart of the book. You talk about restoration, renew, responsibility, revitalization, rewiring, and resilience. These 6 R's basically show us the way of regenerating nature, society, and economy. We had the pandemic that's shown how fast our society could learn, how important it is to listen to the science, how connected we all are, how big transformations can happen so quickly. If we were able to do this for the pandemic, perhaps we could do the same for the climate crisis and all other crises. On top of that, we have now a war that's affecting all of us. What can you tell us about these counter forces and their resilience in times like the multiple crises the business lives every day?
Yes, as you say, this is the heart of the book, really, because I talk about 6 great transitions we have to go through as a society globally. And there are really 2 transitions in nature, 2 in society, and 2 in the economy. And this is how we go in each case from breakdown to breakthrough, supported by a market opportunity. So if I talk through them briefly, we have to go from degradation of ecosystems to restoration of ecosystems, and this is supported by an eco-services economy. So, this is really about protecting and restoring, forests, oceans, all of those parts of nature that are designed to keep life going, and yet we have degraded so badly. So anything we can do to support that is part of the solution. The second one is about resources. How do we go from depletion of natural resources like clean air, clean water, timber, fertile soil, and so on, from depletion to renewal, and that's supported by a circular economy. So this is really about how we remove waste. We rely completely on renewable resources and renewable energy, and we get to a fully circular economy, go from take, make, waste to borrow, make, and return. And there are many great examples of that. So these are the two nature shifts we have to make. In society, we have to go from disparity to responsibility. So this is really dealing with all the inequalities in society. I know Brazil still has many inequalities. The country I come from, South Africa, is still one of the most unequal in the world. So these are big challenges that still remain. That can be income inequality, it can be gender inequality. It'll take more than 250 years on current trends to close the gender pay gap, for example, which still sits at 40% globally. So big challenges there, and that's about the diversity and inclusion agenda and really taking that seriously. Now, we don't have or want to take 250 years, and it's clearly one of those entangled problems, but it is possible. You know, Unilever, when Paul Polman took over, looked like pretty much every other country on gender equality, as an example. So, you know, probably 20% women. Within 10 years, he got to full gender equality, 50% of women at all levels, including top management and on the board. So these things are possible, but we have to really focus on them. And we do that through what's called an access economy. So anything that makes the economy more inclusive for everyone. The fourth shift then is from disease, which we've learned quite a lot about recently, to revitalization. So this is in the well-being economy. And here the key is, of course, to take care of things like COVID, communicable diseases, but to realize that, in fact, 70% of people die today from non-communicable diseases. These are things like heart attacks, strokes, diabetes, and cancers. And 40% of these are preventable. And the reason is these are lifestyle diseases. They're linked to whether we live in toxic environments, polluted environments, our diet, especially whether we consume too much meat, notably red meat and processed meat. We can cut early death by 20% if we switch to more plant-based diets, for example. And it's also about, of course, whether we have unhealthy habits like smoking and pollution in our environment, like in our agricultural system. So, you know, that's the revitalization piece that's really focused on people's health and well-being, not forgetting, of course, mental health, where 1 in 10 people today still suffer from depression, high levels of anxiety, sometimes leading to suicide, a number that's been going up, especially during the pandemic. So those are the two societal shifts. And then we've got the economic shifts, which are about going from disconnection to rewiring in a digital economy. So this is really recognizing that there is a digital divide. Not everyone is connected. Still half the world actually is not connected to the internet, but also that not everyone just has the same access to technology. While some of the developing countries, of course, are catching up on basic digital connection, meanwhile, other countries are steaming ahead on, you know, the fourth industrial revolution with artificial intelligence and big data and virtual reality and 3D printing and digital twins and so on. So we really have to pay attention to whether we're including people in technology and giving them the benefit of technology, and whether technology is really helping us to solve our social and environmental problems, many of which have great potential to do so, but today also cause a lot of destruction. If we look at artificial intelligence, great potential, for example, on helping us diagnose diseases. On the other hand, we've seen that at the moment it's biased towards racial profiling. So we have to take care of the impact of technology. And also we have to think about when technology replaces us. So 1/4 of the world's jobs are at high risk of automation. And we have to think about that and prepare for that and reskill and retrain. The final piece is the one that you mentioned in your question, which is how we go from disruption, which is from all the crises we face, whether it's war or pandemics or climate change, to resilience. in a risk economy. So how do we ensure that we can prepare for, maybe minimize the risk of crises, but then when the crisis hits, to survive through the crisis and then to bounce back after the crisis. And there is a lot we can do here. There are many companies and innovators working on solutions for that. So what you see is together, these are the big challenges of our time. And the most important thing when we think about our own businesses, perhaps, or our own work, is to think about where we can make an impact in one of those areas, but preferably in a way that has benefits across more than one of those dimensions. And so that's really the big challenge of today.
Thank you. I think this is really the heart of the book, and I think everybody has to dedicate some time to study each of these forces. Thank you, Professor Wayne. Now we have another question from Amanda now. Amanda is asking, could you give us examples you consider good initiatives in regeneration of systems and sustainability around the world? Any scale?
Sure, and I won't do it justice because, of course, in the book, there are hundreds of examples, and that's really the point. I think the problem is we don't hear those examples. We hear all the negative stories in the news, in the media, the doom and gloom, if you like. But let me very quickly give you just a bunch of examples to give you a sense. And let's talk about them across the transitions. If you look at that move from degradation to restoration of ecosystems, here we get big tech companies like Google. They're just busy building a new office in London, where on the roof they will have a 300-meter long park, basically a green space where the biodiversity on that roof will probably be higher than in the surrounding countryside. So there's a whole trend of what we sometimes call biophilic design, so love of nature in the design of our buildings. We can have green walls, we can have green roofs. That's one example. You get big companies like Natura or like Danone, who are really investing in regenerative agriculture. Patagonia is another one. Not the region, but the company, who you might think of only as being in clothing, outdoor clothing and equipment, but in fact, they've got into food now as well. And the reason is they really believe we have to change our agricultural practices. And regenerative agriculture is really about putting the life back into the soil. At the moment, industrial agriculture strips all the life from the soil and uses artificial chemicals. And that's been disastrous on virtually every level. So changing that is a big challenge, and there are many companies working on that. If we think about renewal of resources in a circular economy, there's a lovely example I like of a project called Barefoot Solar, where illiterate grandmothers from villages in poor countries around the world go and get training in India for 6 months, and within those 6 months they become trained as solar engineers. Now remember, I said illiterate, so they can't read or write. They're grandmothers, so they're already quite old, and yet they're able to train, and then they go back and install a full lighting system, solar lighting, for their village of 100 households, which they then maintain for the rest of their lives. Take an example, another one like Umicore. This used to be a mining company. It's based in Belgium, but it used to have mining operations all around the world. Today it does no mining. It's the biggest urban mining company in the world, the biggest precious metals recycler. It takes back our phones and our laptops and industrial waste and mining waste, and it extracts all the precious metals like gold and platinum and so on. Or DUS Architects, this is an architecture firm in the Netherlands that uses waste plastic bottles, turns it into 3D printing filament to print all kinds of household features. So they're an architecture firm, so they basically are 3D printing houses using recycled plastic now. If you think about the disparity to responsibility, a company like Chobani, the maker of Greek yogurt in the United States, the largest manufacturer now, Hamdi Ulukaya, himself a Turkish immigrant to the US, is very, very strong on using migrants in the workforce, including refugees. So, you know, that can set an example. Or you take an example like Hello Tractor. This is basically an app, but it's like Uber for tractors. It operates in Africa. So if you have a tractor and your neighbor doesn't, then very quickly you can get them to sign up to the app and they can use your tractor for a very small charge. Let's just take a few more. If you take Hewlett Packard, so they take shipping containers, they put all the medical equipment into those, they ship them around the world to villages where they're needed. And then primary healthcare workers can work with the local community to take their blood or their heart rate, and then they connect with doctors online in the United States to diagnose people. There's the whole trend towards plant-based food, which all the big food companies and chains are taking up, whether it's IKEA or KFC or Burger King, you know, with leaders like Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat. Why is this important? Because something like a plant-based burger has more than 90% less carbon footprint, less water footprint, less land footprint, not to mention animal cruelty. So it's really a big part of the solution. A company like Garbage Clinical Insurance in Indonesia, they work with communities who collect the rubbish, the waste in their communities, and in exchange for that, they get medical insurance. We take a company like WeFarm. This uses farmers who are connected via a very simple kind of WhatsApp type system, so that if they identify something in Brazil, maybe a disease on a crop, then they're immediately connected with farmers around the world who might know what that disease is and how to treat it. Or at the high-tech end, Zen Robotics, which has a robot now that will sort mixed waste with 98% accuracy into all the recycling categories that are needed. One of the examples I love is Ushahidi. When the Haiti earthquake struck a few years ago, then this little tech startup in Africa, in Kenya, called Ushahidi, created an app where the victims could send out texts from where they were trapped under the rubble of the earthquake, saying what they needed. And then this app crowdsourced everyone in the world who speaks Creole and could translate these messages for the aid agencies and get the equipment to and the aid to where it was needed as soon as possible. Or Planet Labs, which images the world in detail every day to see whether there's illegal deforestation or other changes that could be responded to. So I hope that gives you just a small sense, many examples. And to your point about, you know, whether this makes sense for business, you know, Tesla today is one of $6 trillion companies, and its core mission is sustainability. It's to speed the transition to sustainable energy. It makes less than 1% of the world's cars and is valued more than all the other automakers in the world. So this is an example of now how a strategy for thriving, really investing in the future and the solutions for the future, starts to really pay off in the market as well.
Great examples, and the challenge is to scale up these solutions. Thank you, Professor Wayne. Now, Melissa, do you want to make the next question?
Yes. The chapter of responsibility, which brings to attention the access economy and the importance of growing diversity to boost our global GDP, shows the surge of social bonds since 2020s. The goal is to have more inclusive economy. Is this another? This is another entangled problem, as you defined. And what kind of approach do you recommend in order to detangle it?
Yeah, so, with an entangled problem, think of that ball of string. We have to look at it from many different angles. And for example, I do some work with some great companies, and the chairwoman of Melexis, for example, we had this conversation. Now, Melexis, you may not know them as a brand, but they're one of the biggest chip makers in the world, silicon chip makers for computers. And she really emphasized that we won't close that gender pay gap unless we get more women into STEM careers. So STEM, science, technology, engineering, and maths. Because those are the more high-paying jobs. And there's some remarkable research from the United Nations, actually, that shows that if you can at least put some role models in front of pupils and students at school and university who are successful in these science and engineering type careers, who are also women, the chances of women, young women, pursuing those careers goes up dramatically. So I think we have to see, what is it that we're showcasing to especially our young people in terms of diversity and inclusion. And that's just looking, of course, at the gender issue, but the same holds for ethnic inclusion. We have to find the role models, and then we have to look at what are the barriers, and there are barriers around, what happens when someone maybe doesn't have the same qualifications, but has the same ability. So there are companies now who in the recruitment process will insist that on the selection panel, there always has to be a diverse panel. So there has to be somebody from an ethnic minority, there has to be a balance of men and women. And then in the selection process, if diverse candidates don't make it into the top 3 or top 5, whatever the shortlist is, they start again. They go back and open up the recruitment again. So, I think a lot of it is how do we become far more intentional about our efforts to tackle diversity and inclusion. And sometimes that means, looking at who's not getting the opportunities in the economy, that may be around disabilities or around people with migrant or refugee status. And these don't solve themselves. We have to be very conscious and make the extra effort to make it easier for those people to be included. And it is about opportunities. There's a wonderful analogy by Muhammad Yunus, who was the founder of the Grameen Bank and the microcredit movement. He talks about how people who are excluded from the economy are like bonsai trees. So nothing's just in a small field, big tree. And what it's like for people who are excluded, they just haven't been given the opportunity. It's not that they don't have the abilities. That's what I would say.
Thank you. We have 2 questions from the audience. Melissa, do you want to tell Castro's question?
I think I had a problem in between. I just was out for a moment and I don't have it, sorry.
Okay, so I'll read then. Castro, I can't tell your first name because it's Y Castro, so I'm telling your last name. The global economy after, yeah, can you read, Professor Wayne, or do you want me to?
I don't see that one.
I don't see? Okay. The global economy, after years of very low inflation, is now having to deal with a sequence of supply shocks. First the pandemic and now the horrible war. Energy is one of the villains, given our still strong dependence on fossil fuels. On the other hand, there are analysts saying that the pressure on accelerating the transition to clean energy increased the problem given the reduction on capex investments on oil and gas plants, for example. How do you see this statement, and in your opinion, what is the proper strategy to cope with risk of lack of sustainable energy enough to completely replace carbon resources in time? Is this a false dilemma?
Great question, and I might just combine it with Geraldo's as well, which I see in the chat, which is also about the energy transition. So definitely we are facing these supply chain challenges, and it exposes actually the risks we have of very long and complex supply chains. And so just on the supply chain issue, there are a couple of things I think that we can take from that. One is we have to think about what needs to be global and what can be local. Many of the things that we are now dependent on globally could be produced locally, but we've gone for the easy solution, which is maybe to get it from China or somewhere else, and it creates a vulnerability. So I think localize what you can is always a good strategy for resilience, or at least regionalize, if not localize. Just think about the impact that 3D printing can have here. So why are we shipping things around the world when many of those things we could just get the design sent electronically and printed locally with local materials? That doesn't work for everything, but for many things it could work. Of course, with the war in Ukraine, it is especially that exposes our dependence to fossil fuels and to Russia in particular. I actually think this will have the impact within quite a short time, actually, the net impact of speeding the transition to renewables. Of course, in the short term, we're going to just get energy wherever we can, preferably not from Russia. So production in some places will go up in order to just deal with the short-term demand that is coming. But it has totally exposed us to the reality that we don't want to be dependent on any country for fossil fuels anymore. And it combines with the fact that today, in almost every country of the world, new renewable electricity is cheaper than new fossil fuel. And that's including oil, gas, coal, and nuclear. So it's much cheaper and much quicker to build a solar or a wind farm to very quickly get energy from that. And there are other options as well, of course, hydro, if it's done correctly, and other solutions like gravity and battery storage linked to that. But what I think it will do is really get us to speed up our transition to renewables, also to think much more carefully about microgrids, so having less dependence on big central suppliers and rather start to have energy produced and consumed locally. This goes hand in hand with all of the battery technology. So of course, it's putting pressure in the short term. There's money going to defense and to other things which we would far rather spend on education and on sustainable products and renewable energy. That's just an unfortunate consequence of war and of other disruptions. But all of these solutions we've been talking about move us to a world where we become less vulnerable to these kinds of shocks. Just think about the circular economy as well. One of the reasons you would go to a circular economy is you get back your control over your resources instead of relying on a mine somewhere or a fossil fuel company that's extracting oil and gas somewhere. You get the resources back from your own products or from others' products. And there's work going into how we do that for many different things. BASF is one of the companies that supports my chair, and they're investing a lot into what's called chem cycling. How do we take plastics and turn them back into their molecular structure so that we can make plastics or something else from it again, so that we don't always depend on those original sources with long supply chains. Even better if you're getting your own products back and you can turn them into products again. So I think it's not an easy one, but I think we will look back in 10 years and say that this supply chain crunch and the war that's exacerbated our crisis now will be a tipping point in a positive direction.
Thank you, Professor Wayne. And,
let me just answer quickly. Geralda had a follow-up about nuclear energy. And we do see, I mean, even the UK investing again in nuclear. I mean, at the moment, to be clear, nuclear economically is not a feasible alternative to renewables. It doesn't make economic sense. They take 10 years to plan, a number of years to build. They operate for about 20 years and they take about 10 years to decommission. And then we've still got the problem of nuclear waste. So, they're very expensive. Of course, they're a wonderful source of relatively low carbon energy. But from a sort of cost benefit point of view at the moment, they shouldn't be a viable alternative. But we live in a real world where politics plays a big part. And so we will see nuclear, and we also start to see some new nuclear technologies. Bill Gates, for example, promotes a sort of smaller kind of nuclear. And so I have no doubt that nuclear will play some role. But I don't think it's perhaps the big climate solution that people are thinking it will be. I see we're about out of time.
yes, we have 1 minute.
Yeah, thank you to the audience. Now that we are almost at the end of our talk, we would like to finish with a poem of Wayne. So we would like to listen from you. Thank you.
Yes, well, thank you for those who've been here. Let me end with one which is called Change the World, because at the end of the day, I think that is what we're all trying to do in our own way, to do our best to make a positive change in the world. So see what you think of this. Let's change the world, let's shift it, let's shake it and remake it. Let's rearrange the pieces, the patterns in the maze, the reason for our days in ways that make it better, in shades that make it brighter, that make the burden lighter because it's shared, because we dared to dream and then to sweat it, to make our mark and not regret it. Let's plant a seed and humbly say, I changed the world today. Let's change the world, let's lift it. Let's take it and awake it. Let's challenge every leader, the citadels of power, the prisoners in the tower, our hour of needs upon us. It's time to raise our voices, to stand up for our choices, because it's right, because we fight for all that's just and fair, for a planet we can share. Let's join the cause and boldly say, we'll change the world today. Let's change the world, let's love it. Let's hold it and unfold it. Let's redesign the future, the fate of earth and sky, the existential why. Let's fly to where there's hope, to where the world is greener, where air and water's cleaner, because it's smart to make a start to fix what we have broken, our children's wish unspoken. Let's be the ones who rise and say, we changed the world today. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
We invite
It's a pleasure.
everyone, to read the book. And thank you so much. We are very grateful for you to be here, and thanks for the audience. Thank you, Melissa, also.
Thank you too for organizing. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day wherever you are, and strive to thrive.
Yes, thrive. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you.